Am I the a-hole for cutting my stepmother off after my father's passing? I, 41F, lost my father exactly 31 days ago. They say grief comes in waves, but for me, it's felt more like being pinned under a collapsed building. You're alive, you're breathing, but the weight is so immense you can't remember what it felt like to stand up straight. My dad fought stage 4 esophageal cancer for 22 months. It wasn't a brave battle like you see in the movies. It was a slow, agonizing erosion of the man I knew. By the end, he was a shadow, a collection of sharp bones and labored breaths. And yet, even as I watched him fade, the person standing on the other side of his hospital bed made the experience a living hell. To understand why I finally blocked my stepmother, 60F, you have to understand the 39 years that preceded his death. She entered my life when I was 2. My biological mother struggled with severe addiction and disappeared shortly after I was born. I have no memory of her. For all intents and purposes, this woman was the only mother I ever knew. And she made sure I knew exactly how much she hated that fact. Growing up, the house was a minefield. She wasn't just mean, she was calculated. She had this way of looking at me, even when I was 5 or 6, like I was a stain on a rug she couldn't scrub out. My father worked as a long-haul trucker for much of my childhood, meaning he was gone for 2 weeks at a time. When he was gone, the mask fell away completely. By the time I was 16, I had suffered 11 broken bones. I want to be clear about that number because people in my extended family like to pretend it was roughhousing or accidents. It wasn't. It was a wrist snapped because I didn't wash the dishes fast enough. It was ribs cracked because I talked back by asking if I could go to a friend's house. It was a collarbone broken when she pushed me down a flight of stairs because I tripped over the cat. My father knew. He had to have known. But he was a man who lived in a perpetual state of apology. When he came home from the road, she would transform into the doting wife. She'd have a hot meal ready, the house would be spotless, and she'd whisper in his ear about how difficult and rebellious I had been while he was away. He chose to believe her because believing the truth meant he would have to blow his life up. He chose his comfort over my safety. I left at 16. I didn't run away. I just walked out and moved in with a friend's older sister, worked 3 jobs, and finished high school on my own. We didn't speak for years. But as I got older, I felt that biological pull to have a father. We reconnected in my late 20s, but it was always on her terms. If I called, she answered. If I visited, she sat in the room, her eyes boring into me, ensuring we never had a private moment. When the diagnosis came 2 years ago, I thought maybe, just maybe, the impending mortality would soften her. For a while, it seemed like it did. This is the part that's hard to explain to people who haven't dealt with a narcissist. She became sickly nice. During his chemo rounds, I would drive 3 hours to the city hospital. I'd walk into the room, and she'd be sitting there, stroking his hand, speaking in a high-pitched, performative coo. "Oh, look who's here, honey. It's your daughter. Isn't that sweet?" She would offer me tea. She would ask about my job. It was terrifying. It felt like being trapped in a room with a predator that was pretending to be a house cat. I played along because I could see the light fading in my dad's eyes, and I didn't want his final months to be a battlefield. I swallowed my resentment. I swallowed the memory of the broken bones. I sat in those uncomfortable plastic chairs for 12 hours a day, watching the foredrip, just so I could hold his hand. In the final weeks, when he moved to hospice care at home, she ramped up the gatekeeping. She would tell me he was too tired for visitors, only for me to find out later he'd been asking for me all afternoon. She would forget to tell me when the doctors were coming by for updates. She was reclaiming her territory. He passed away on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there. She didn't call me until 3 hours after the funeral home had already picked up his body. Her voice on the phone was cold, devoid of the sickly sweet tone she'd used for 2 years.
"He's gone," she said.
"The funeral is Friday. Don't be late." The funeral was a performance. She cried the loudest. She clung to the casket. My siblings and I have 2 half-siblings from her and my dad, stood there like statues. We were grieving a man we never truly got to know because she had built a wall around him. A week after the service, I drove to the house. I wanted to talk about his personal effects. There were things that meant nothing to a stranger, but everything to me. My dad was an amateur carpenter in his spare time. He had a set of old, rusted chisels that belonged to his grandfather. He had a collection of journals, leather-bound books where he'd record the weather, the places he drove on the road, and snippets of poetry he liked. I wanted those journals more than anything. I wanted to know what he was thinking when he was alone in that truck. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the garage door was open. There were stacks of cardboard boxes lined up on the curb. I walked inside and the house felt different. It didn't just feel empty of him. It felt erased. The photos of us as children, the few he'd managed to keep on the mantel, were gone. His recliner was gone. The smell of his pipe tobacco had been replaced by the sharp, sterile scent of bleach and lemon cleaner. "What are you doing?" I asked, finding her in the kitchen. She was sipping coffee, looking through a stack of paperwork.
"Cleaning," she said.
"I can't live in a museum." "Where are his tools?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "The ones in the garage?" "Sold," she replied casually. "A man from the hardware store came by and took the lot for $500. I need the money for the estate taxes." "And the journals?" My voice was shaking now. "The ones he kept by his bed?" She looked at me then, and the mask was completely gone. This was the woman from my childhood. "I threw them out, honey. They were just old paper. Probably just filled with his complaints about his medications. I didn't see the point in keeping them." I felt like she'd punched me in the stomach. "You threw them out? You didn't think to ask me? Or my brother?" Those were his thoughts. That was all we had left of him. She stood up, leaning her hands on the counter. "Listen to me. I was his wife for nearly 40 years. I am his legal next of kin. Everything in this house, the walls, the floor, the air, is mine. I don't owe you a souvenir. You need to move on. You were barely a part of his life anyway." I left that day in a daze, but it didn't end there. Over the next 2 weeks, she began a campaign of psychological warfare via text and phone calls with my siblings and me. We had a group chat to discuss the settling of the will. My dad didn't have much, the house and a small life insurance policy. We weren't fighting over money, but we wanted to ensure his grandchildren got a few tokens of remembrance. She sent a text that read, "I don't know why you all are acting so entitled. Your father told me in his final days that he only stayed in touch with you out of guilt. He said he finally felt at peace knowing he wouldn't have to pretend to enjoy your company anymore. My children are the only ones who truly cared for him. You were just vultures waiting for him to die." It was a lie. I know it was a lie. I sat with him in those chemo sessions. I saw the way he looked at me when she wasn't in the room. But hearing it, reading it in black and white, felt like she was killing him all over again. The final straw happened 3 days ago. I had to go back to the house to pick up some tax documents that were mailed there by mistake. I didn't want to go inside. I just wanted to grab the mail and leave. She saw me from the window and came out onto the porch. "Still lurking around?" she called out. "You really can't let go, can you?" "I'm just picking up my mail at my dad's house," I said, trying to keep my voice flat. She walked down the steps, her face contorted in a sneer. "It's not your dad's house."
"I told you that. He's dead. He's gone."
"He's a pile of ash in a jar, and this house is mine. You have no father. You have no home here. If I see you on this property again, I'm calling the police for trespassing." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the woman who had broken my wrist when I was 12. I saw the woman who had spent 40 years isolating a man until he had nothing left but her. And I realized that as long as I kept a door open to her, I was giving her permission to keep breaking me. I didn't say a word. I got in my car. I drove to a parking lot a mile away, and I began the process. I blocked her cell number. I blocked her on Facebook and Instagram. I blocked her email address. Then I called my siblings. I told them, "I am done. I will not attend family dinners. I will not be at Thanksgiving. If she is there, I am not. I am mourning Dad on my own, in my own way, but that woman is dead to me." The last 48 hours have been a nightmare of a different kind. My dad's sisters, my aunts, have been calling me incessantly. They belong to that generation that believes family is family, no matter how toxic it is. "She's a widow," my Aunt Sarah cried into the phone. "She's grieving. People say things they don't mean when they're in pain. You're being so cold, and life is just too short for this kind of drama. Your father would be heartbroken to see his family torn apart like this." I tried to explain. I told her about the journals. I told her about the vulture's comment. I even, for the first time in decades, mentioned the physical abuse from when I was a kid. The response? "Oh, that was a long time ago. We all did things differently back then. You need to be the bigger person. She's an old woman and she's all alone now. So, I am only a punching bag to her? I don't think so. I don't believe her for a second. So, am I the asshole?" Update. A few weeks after I made my original post, my siblings and I got formal notice that my father's will was being read. That alone shocked me more than I can explain, because based on the way my stepmother had been acting, I genuinely thought there either wasn't a will or that everything had been left to her, and she was just dragging out the process for appearances. She had spent the entire month after his death behaving like she had complete ownership over every single thing he left behind. She talked as if the matter had already been settled. She threw things out, sold belongings, and repeatedly reminded us that she was his wife and therefore the rightful owner of everything he had ever touched. Looking back now, I understand why she was so frantic to clear the house out before the paperwork caught up to her. The will reading was held at my father's attorney's office. My siblings and I attended together. My stepmother came in wearing all black despite it being over a month since the funeral, carrying tissues and doing that dramatic widow performance she loves so much whenever there's an audience. She barely acknowledged me except for one strange smile that looked more like a grimace. At the time I thought she was angry I had blocked her. Now I know it was because she already knew what was in that will. Apparently my father had updated it years ago. Not recently. Not during his cancer diagnosis. Not in some suspicious final days haze. Years ago, while healthy and fully competent. And in that will, he divided his estate carefully. My stepmother and her children were not left destitute. Far from it. She received a substantial amount of money, investment accounts, life insurance benefits, retirement funds, vehicles, jewelry, and other assets that added up to what the attorney bluntly described as a very comfortable inheritance. Her children also received financial gifts and several valuable items specifically designated to them. But the house, my father's house, the one she spent weeks insisting was hers, was left to me. Not jointly, not partially, not with strings attached.
To me.
There were additional provisions stating that some family heirlooms and personal effects were to be divided among me and my siblings. My father had listed things specifically.
Tools.
Furniture. Watches. Old photographs.
Books.
Even some sentimental keepsakes I hadn't known he remembered. Then came the part that hit me so hard I had to physically grip the arm of my chair. My father had attached a personal letter to the will. The attorney read it aloud. I don't remember every word because I was crying too hard halfway through, but the overall message was clear. It was an apology. He wrote that he knew he had failed us. He wrote that he had not protected us the way a father should have. He admitted that fear, weakness, and denial had made him complicit in things he should have stopped. He said he knew sorry could never undo what had happened, but he wanted to leave behind something tangible that reflected his regret and his love. He wrote that the house was being left to me because he wanted me to finally have a place in this family that no one could take from me. He specifically stated that this decision was made of his own free will and had been discussed with counsel at the time the will was drafted. The room went dead silent. I don't think I have words for what it felt like hearing that. There was relief because after a lifetime of wondering whether he saw what was happening, whether he knew, whether he cared, I finally had confirmation that he had known. There was validation in black and white that I had not imagined my childhood. I had not exaggerated. I had not been difficult or dramatic or too sensitive. But there was grief too. Deep, ugly grief. Because he knew. He knew.
And he still let it happen.
An apology after death is still an apology, and I am grateful for it, but hearing those words also meant accepting that the man I loved had understood far more than I ever wanted him to. My stepmother completely lost composure. She started crying immediately, then yelling, then demanding the attorney fix this mistake. She claimed my father would never have done such a thing. She insisted he had promised her the house repeatedly. She accused the attorney of misconduct. She accused me of somehow orchestrating the entire thing. At one point, she stood up and shouted that I had manipulated my dying father into changing the will while he was medicated. That accusation lasted all of 30 seconds before the attorney informed her the will had been executed many years earlier and that there was documented proof of its drafting, witnesses, and filing. The look on her face was almost surreal. Everything suddenly made sense. Her bizarre behavior after his death, the forced kindness, the frantic house clearing, the aggressive claims of ownership, the constant insistence that the house was hers. She knew. She had known the entire time. She knew the house was never hers and had spent the weeks after his death trying to establish control before the will was formally executed, likely hoping pressure, guilt, or intimidation would push me into surrendering it voluntarily. The second the meeting ended, she switched tactics entirely. Within 24 hours, she was calling from unknown numbers because I still had her blocked. When I didn't answer, she began leaving voicemails. Suddenly, I was sweetheart again. Suddenly, she was talking about how grief had made everyone emotional. Suddenly, she wanted us to come together as family. She claimed my father wouldn't want conflict over material things. She said she knew the house technically belongs to me, but that morally it should go to her because she had lived there for decades and it was the home of her memories. She said perhaps I could do the right thing and sign it over or sell it to her privately at a discount. When I ignored that, the offers became more manipulative. She told me she would let bygones be bygones if I simply deeded the property to her. She said maybe we could, finally, have the mother-daughter relationship we were denied. That part almost made me laugh. 40 years of abuse, and suddenly she wanted to play mother because real estate was involved. When I continued refusing contact, she escalated. She contested the will. Her official claim was exactly what many of you predicted, that I had manipulated my father during his final illness, coerced him into changing his estate plans, and exploited his declining health to steal the home. That went nowhere. Her attorney likely knew it was nonsense from the start. The will had been drafted long before his diagnosis, long before hospice, long before any alleged manipulation could have occurred. It had witnesses, records, notes from the attorney confirming my father's intent. The challenge collapsed almost immediately. After that failed, she moved to what she knows best: character assassination. She began telling extended family, neighbors, church members, and apparently anyone with functioning ears that I had preyed on my dying father. She claimed I emotionally blackmailed him into disinheriting his wife. She portrayed herself as a helpless widow being thrown out of her home by an ungrateful stepdaughter motivated by greed. For a brief moment, I worried it might work. Then something unexpected happened. People started talking. And when they talked, the truth came out. Apparently far more people knew about the abuse than I ever realized. My father's sisters, the same ones who had initially told me to be the bigger person, went suspiciously quiet once the smear campaign started. One of them eventually admitted that they had known my stepmother was hard on me growing up, but had not realized the extent until hearing what she was now saying publicly. Another confessed she remembered seeing bruises when I was a child and accepting absurd excuses because confronting the reality would have meant confronting my father too. Neighbors came forward with stories about hearing screaming from the house when I was young. One of my childhood friends' mothers reached out and told me she had tried to report concerns years ago after I showed up at their house with a fractured arm and an explanation that didn't make sense. Even some of my stepmother's own social circles started distancing themselves once they realized she was spinning obvious lies. Her campaign fell apart because too many people had seen pieces of the truth over the years. And when they compared notes, the picture became impossible to deny. My siblings, yes, including the half-siblings she actually raised, also sided with me. That was probably the most surprising part. I expected resistance from them. I expected excuses. I expected at least some loyalty to their mother. Instead, both admitted that while she never treated them the way she treated me, they had witnessed enough over the years to know exactly who she was. They had spent much of childhood rationalizing it because children normalize what they grow up with. As adults, seeing her behavior around the will stripped away whatever denial remained. One of them told me point-blank that her father leaving me the house made perfect sense because he knew what he owed me. That conversation wrecked me in ways I didn't expect. As for the house itself, I did eventually go back. Walking through it after the legal dust settled was one of the strangest experiences of my life. It felt haunted, not in a supernatural way, but in the way places can hold memory inside their walls. I stood in the kitchen where she used to corner me. I stood at the bottom of the staircase where she pushed me. I stood in the hallway outside my old bedroom and had to sit on the floor because my legs gave out. And yet, for the first time in my life, I was in that house without fear. No one could tell me to leave. No one could threaten me. No one could make me small inside it again. I found that she had stripped much of it before moving out. Not illegally, mostly furniture and decor that belonged to her, but she made sure to leave the place as bare and cold as possible.
Petty to the end.
She had also clearly taken anything sentimental she thought might matter to me if she could get away with it. Several items my father designated in the will were missing. We are still sorting through that legally, but not everything was gone. Hidden in the back of a closet in what had once been my father's office was a sealed box with my name on it. Inside were old photos, letters, cards I made as a child, school drawings, and small keepsakes I hadn't seen in decades. He had kept them. All of them. Every terrible homemade Father's Day card. Every crayon drawing, every school portrait. Even when she had spent years convincing me I was unwanted, he had kept those things hidden away. That box broke me more than the letter did, because it meant there had always been love there. Weak love, cowardly love, deeply flawed love, but love. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that knowledge yet. People like tidy endings. They want stories where the parent redeems themselves, the abuser gets punished, and the victim finds peace the moment justice arrives. Real life is messy. Getting the house did not erase what happened. My father's apology did not magically heal 40 years of damage. Watching my stepmother lose her manipulation campaign did not make me feel triumphant the way revenge fantasies suggest it should. Mostly I feel tired.
Vindicated, yes.
Relieved, absolutely. But also deeply sad. Because in the end, my father waited until death to protect me. Still, for the first time in my life, the truth is out in the open.
People know what she did.
People know what he failed to stop. People know why I cut her off. And no one is calling me cruel anymore. My stepmother still sends occasional messages through other people, mostly alternating between rage and bargaining depending on the day. Sometimes I'm a monster who stole her life. Sometimes I'm a grieving daughter she wants to reconcile with. The number remains blocked either way. I have no intention of ever speaking to her again. The house is mine now. I'm renovating it slowly. Some rooms I may keep. Some I may get down to the studs and rebuild entirely because there are corners of that place that feel soaked in bad memory. Maybe that's fitting. Maybe the house my father left me is not just an inheritance. Maybe it's restitution. Not enough. Never enough. But something. So for everyone who told me in my first post that cutting her off was overdue rather than cruel, you were right. If anything, I should have done it years ago. The woman who spent my childhood breaking me thought she could spend my adulthood controlling me too. She was wrong. And if she's furious that the house she tried to use as leverage now belongs to the child she spent decades trying to erase, that sounds like her problem. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.